Major announcement. Ted Cruz tries to re-energize his campaign and why it may not be enough. Trump and Clinton win big. Now they're taking even more jabs at each other. Teaching compassion. Pope Francis encourages us to be good Samaritans in our everyday lives. And the Speaker of the House speaks. What Paul Ryan tells Georgetown students this afternoon. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 27th, 2016. Trying desperately to fire up his campaign, Ted Cruz today names Carly Fiorina as his running mate. Good evening, thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Cruz's big announcement follows huge primary wins for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. We have team coverage tonight. Wyatt Goolsbee reports on Trump's foreign policy speech. Jason Calvi is in Pennsylvania explaining what motivates voters there. And Lauren Ashburn is at our political desk here in Washington. Lauren?
Brian, Donald Trump dominated the board last night and declared himself the presumptive nominee, saying it's over. He surpassed polling projections. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton won 4 out of 5 states in the majority of Democrat delegates. But the big announcement came from Ted Cruz. Cruz brought Carly Fiorina back into the fold, naming the former presidential candidate as his running mate despite losing all primaries last night and losing to John Kasich in 2 out of 5 primaries, meaning he came in third. Cruz is determined to keep going with Fiorina at his side.
This is a fight. This is a fight for the soul of our party and the future of our nation.
Cruz and Kasich have no mathematical chance of getting to the 1237 number of delegates needed to clinch the nomination that may well go to Donald Trump after a strong showing last night. Donald Trump sweeps Super Tuesday.
I just want to thank everybody. This is a far bigger win than we even expected, all 5. And that's something that's...
People in 5 states, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, cast ballots in the Acela primary, named after Amtrak's Northeast track. At stake, 172 Republican and 384 Democratic delegates. For Democrats, Hillary Clinton taking home wins.
With your help, we're going to come back to Philadelphia for the Democratic National Convention. With the most votes and the most pledged delegates.
But she wasn't able to completely shut out Bernie Sanders.
We are doing something very unusual in contemporary American politics. We are telling the truth.
Ted Cruz says the future is with his campaign.
It is going to be we the people taking our country back and doing it together.
John Kasich continues to look ahead to the Republican convention in July.
I'd like to see an open convention. Ted Cruz would like to see an open convention, and I think Trump would not.
With the nominations all but locked up for Trump and Clinton, the delegate count is as follows. According to the Associated Press, Hillary Clinton has 2,151 delegates, to Sanders 1,338, and there are 2,383 needed to secure the Democratic nomination. As for Republicans, Donald Trump has 954 to Cruz's 562, and again, that 1237 is the magic number needed for the Republican nomination. After his big win last night, Donald Trump is pivoting away from the primary and toward the general election. Today, he took on some of the biggest foreign policy issues in a speech right here in Washington. Wyatt Goolsbee joins us from the Mayflower Hotel, where Mr. Trump spoke this afternoon. Wyatt?
Lauren, all eyes have been on Trump here this afternoon in Washington. His speech today had a different tone than his typical rallies. His goal today was to deliver a policy speech that's more presidential.
My foreign policy will always put the interests of the American people and American security above all else.
It was a different kind of Donald Trump speech. Instead of making his typical eyebrow-raising statements, Trump came off calm. Speaking with a prompter, the Republican frontrunner talked about trade, the global economy, and national security. He warned allies they would be left to defend themselves if they don't pay their fair share.
The countries we are defending must pay for the cost of this defense. And if not, the U.S. must be prepared to let these countries defend themselves. We have no choice.
Trump criticized President Obama's handling of ISIS, saying the administration has made the Middle East more unstable.
We left Christians subject to intense persecution and even genocide. We have done nothing to help the Christians, nothing. And we should always be ashamed for that lack of action.
While Trump spoke inside, protesters lined up outside. Some held signs with strong language criticizing his views on immigration.
If you're talking about deporting 12 million Hispanics, that is already enough to create a rather ferocious police state. I don't want him to become the Republican nominee. If he does, that's much too close for comfort.
Today's audience here at the Mayflower Hotel included a number of foreign policy experts that Trump may want to court. This is supposed to be the first in a series of speeches that will lay out Trump's policies. Lauren?
Wyatt, what did Mr. Trump say about Hillary Clinton? Did he go on the attack?
Yes, Lauren, he was critical about her handling of the attacks on a U.S. compound in Benghazi, Libya, while she was Secretary of State. Frequently, Trump talks and connects Clinton with what he calls Obama's failed policies. Lauren.
Wyatt, thank you very much. Wyatt reporting from Washington, D.C. Jason Calvi continues our team coverage from Pennsylvania. That's one of the 5 states that voted yesterday. Jason, it sounds like many people in the Keystone State are upset with the economy, and they're looking to Mr. Trump for help.
That's what voters here are telling me. About 20% of the people who work in this part of Pennsylvania work in manufacturing. That's double the national average. Many are hurting financially, so they're looking to the billionaire businessman, Donald Trump. York County, Pennsylvania. It's called Factory Tour Capital of the World. Harley Davidson, Utz Potato Chips, Snyder Pretzels, Stouffer's Animal Crackers, Caterpillar. But it used to be dozens more, both here and across the state. That's why so many say they voted for Trump, including Evan Alessi, who works 2 jobs to make ends meet.
He's going to bring jobs back here.
York is still cleaning up after the recession.
Houses just stopped being built. People didn't have the money for it. People were losing their jobs. Companies were pulling out. Businesses closing down, downsizing.
The Brookings Institution says the U.S. lost 7 million manufacturing jobs from 1980 to 2010. In Pennsylvania, the U.S. Census Bureau shows a steady decline between 2007 and 2012. Sam Wiley's family used to have 16 food trucks serving lunch outside factories. Now it's 2. He also voted for Trump.
You got to appreciate his aggressiveness, his enthusiasm, and his kind of no-nonsense mentality.
In exit polls, 2/3 of Republicans who say trade with other countries takes jobs from Americans ended up voting for Trump.
We take pride in things that we create here. This is U.S. made. You know, instead of sending our work out of the nation, we should be having people here in our country doing the work.
And registered Democrat Don Shue voted twice for President Obama, but wouldn't vote Democrat yesterday.
I'm going to end up voting for Trump.
Why?
Because I think that he actually has the economic sense to get us back where we need to be economically.
And just in, we know that Donald Trump has won even more of the delegates here in Pennsylvania. He now needs only 48% of the remaining delegates to win the GOP nomination. Lauren?
Jason, it was really a sweep last night. What about other demographic groups? How did Mr. Trump handle those?
There were exit polls done in 3 of the states last night, Connecticut, Maryland, and here in Pennsylvania. And Donald Trump swept most of the demographics, including people of all economic backgrounds and educational backgrounds, as well as both genders, male and female.
Jason, fascinating piece from York, Pennsylvania. We appreciate it. And Brian, coming up later in the broadcast, we'll break down the evangelical numbers and discuss what Donald Trump meant by saying that Hillary Clinton is playing the woman card.
All right, thank you, Lauren Ashburn. Meanwhile, other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Former House Speaker Dennis Hastert is sentenced to more than a year in prison after pleading guilty in a hush money case. Prosecutors say he violated banking laws, trying to pay millions of dollars to hide his sexual abuse of teenage boys that he coached in high school. The judge called him a serial child molester, ordering him to spend 2 years on supervised release after serving 15 months in prison. Hastert must also undergo sex offender treatment and pay a $250,000 fine to a crime victims fund. Hastert served as Speaker from 1999 to 2007. He's one of the highest-ranking politicians in U.S. history to receive a prison sentence. The lone surviving suspect in the November Paris terror attacks appears in a French courtroom today. His lawyer says Salah Abdeslam is facing preliminary charges of terrorist murders and possession and use of bombs and weapons. French prosecutors say Abdeslam was instrumental in coordinating logistics for the deadly November 13th attacks. He was arrested in Belgium last month and was secretly moved from Brussels to Paris overnight. Testimony from the 26-year-old will likely prove significant in linking the 3 separate attacks that killed 130 people. Defense Secretary Ash Carter says he's deeply troubled by a proposal to cut wartime funding to pay for weapons and troops. That plan comes from House Republican Mac Thornberry of Texas.
It's gambling with warfighting money at a time of war, proposing to cut off our troops' funding in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria in the middle of the year.
Carter testified today before the Senate Appropriations Defense Subcommittee. Thornberry defends his proposal, saying it will fill shortfalls in Obama's defense bill. For the plan to work, the next president would need to submit a supplemental budget to Congress next year. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan makes a pitch for conservatism to young adult Catholics today. The youngest Speaker of the House in nearly 150 years spoke at Georgetown University's Student Town Hall. Catherine Zeltner takes us there tonight.
Brian, Speaker Ryan outlined his conservative ideas at the nation's oldest Catholic university today. He said millennials should be conservative because it gives them more options to customize their life, just like they can customize apps on their iPhone. The Catholic politician's speech spanned from poverty to college debt. He also hit on criminal justice reform, saying more people need to earn a second chance in life. In a town hall-like forum, the speaker took questions from students, including one Republican who said he's not excited about any candidates and needs some encouragement in this race. Ryan told him to focus on policies, not the person.
Republicans lose personality contests anyway. We always do. And just have learned that lesson the hard way. But we win ideas contests. And this is what we want to have as an ideas contest. So I would just ask you to raise your gaze and look at the horizon that we're trying to paint and look at the agenda that we're offering you so that the people of this country get to choose which path we take.
The university also recently hosted presidential candidate Bernie Sanders and former candidates Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum. One Georgetown student shares his take on Ryan's speech.
I thought it was really interesting hearing him talk about student debt, and his kind of went into some specifics. But at the same time, I think on a lot of things, on climate change, on entitlement reform, you know, what you're going to get with a lot of these politicians and a lot of people that would come here from both sides of the aisle is not a lot of specifics.
It was 1 week ago when Planned Parenthood President Cecile Richards spoke here at Georgetown. Ryan did not discuss his pro-life views or expand on his Catholic faith, but he did tell students to read St. Thomas Aquinas and base their voting decisions on reason and logic, not emotion. Brian.
Good advice. Thank you, Catherine Zeltner. Coming up, the Vice President at the Vatican. What brings Joe Biden to the Holy See? And new developments on the campaign trail. We share reaction to today's political news. Just a few of the many faces in St. Peter's Square today. They came to see and hear Pope Francis. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday of the 5th week of Easter. I'm Brian Patrick. To ignore the suffering of man means to ignore God. That from Pope Francis referencing the parable of the Good Samaritan at today's general audience. Ed Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, covering the audience and other news from the Vatican. Ed, the Holy Father talked about inauthentic religiosity. What does that mean, and how is that part of the Good Samaritan parable?
Okay, what he means there, Brian, is essentially that authentic religiosity means that you have service for others, you show service for others. It's not just about worship, it's not just about observing religious liturgies, for example. It's actually about manifesting itself in service for others. And he says that ignoring the suffering of people means ignoring God. And he uses, of course, the example of the Good Samaritan to express that.
And how does he build on his signature theme of compassion in his teaching today?
Yes, what he means by that is the compassion is very central to this parable, of course, and it means that to suffer with others is essentially the meaning of compassion. Com, he says, means with, and passion means suffering, and it means seeing the suffering in others and responding to it. And he says that those who do that are true followers of the Lord.
And finally, why is American Vice President Joe Biden at the Vatican this weekend?
Yes, Joe Biden's coming tomorrow, and he's giving a talk at the Vatican. The Pontifical Council for Culture is having a conference on Friday about regenerative medicine, and he's coming to give a talk about this so-called moonshot program, which aims to accelerate cancer research. And he wants to talk about that at the Vatican. He's been invited by the Council for Culture. What will be interesting, though, is to see how much reception he gets at the Vatican, and by the Pope in particular, as he is the most senior American Catholic public figure to support legalized abortion. So how he'll be received will be of interest, I think, to quite a few people.
Excellent point. Thank you. Ed Penton joining us from Rome.
Thanks, Brian.
And we go back now to Lauren Ashburn at our political desk with more on how people of faith are voting.
Brian, when it comes to voting in this Acela primary, both Kasich and Ted Cruz had difficulty holding on to evangelicals and conservative Republicans, many of whom sat this one out. Let's look at some of the numbers. According to CBS News, in 3 states with exit polls, evangelicals made up 4 out of 10 voters. That's down 14 points from the average primaries to date. And Trump beat Cruz by more than 25 points in this group. This is one of the best performances among evangelicals. And according to ABC News, Kasich's support came from ideological moderates. Joining us now is John Gizzi, White House correspondent for Newsmax. John, welcome back to the program.
Always a pleasure, Lauren. Thanks for having me.
Why did Cruz and Kasich lose evangelicals?
I think that you have to go back to the remarks that Jerry Falwell Jr. made when Donald Trump spoke at Liberty University. At the time, he freely acknowledged that Mr. Trump was very far removed from evangelicals' ideal of a candidate, that they did not always agree with him on issues, and yet they felt his image as a fighter and someone who said what was on his mind and who was used to getting the goals he set out would help them in their endeavors. In other words, very much like in supporting Ronald Reagan, non-churchgoer, out of Hollywood, the first divorced president, over Jimmy Carter, born-again Baptist and Sunday school teacher. They were opting with someone they felt who would be better at achieving their goals than someone like them.
Let's move on to Carly Fiorina. She's the big news. Just happened that Ted Cruz has announced that she will be his vice presidential candidate. Why choose her, and why now?
In football, they call it the Hail Mary pass. In golf, it would be a hole-in-one if successful. For my part, as a not-so-young political reporter, I say it's 16C having its day. 40 years ago, in 1976, when Ronald Reagan trailed Gerald Ford, his campaign came up with the very unique and to some improbable idea of naming a vice presidential running mate before the presidential candidate was even chosen. That was the late Senator Dick Schweiker of Pennsylvania.
And it really hurt Reagan because people didn't like Schweizer, and so he was then able to say, let's change the rules and make it so that Ford has to change have a vice president. But
and
I guess
that narrowly lost.
Right. It almost made Ford lose and Reagan win. But the question here is, why is he doing it right now?
Well, again,
that's the Hail Mary, and he wants to win.
Exactly. And I think this, very much like Reagan, he trails Donald Trump in delegates by picking Carly Fiorina, former opponent, with an eye on the California primary next month, where she is from.
Where she's very strong.
Right. He sees this as an opportunity to gain delegates, keep Donald Trump below the magic 1,237, and possibly win on a subsequent ballot.
Last night, Donald Trump said of Hillary Clinton, if she were a man, I don't think she'd get 5%. The only thing she's got is the woman card. And the beautiful thing is, women don't like her. Why is he doing this?
Well, I think this is Trump burnishing his persona as someone who casts political correctness to the wind and says exactly what's on his mind, whether you like it or not. It's his stock in trade. It's his MO, so to speak. Now, that said, I can tell you a lot of people who have accepted that the Donald will be the nominee are now saying, as Congressman Cynthia Loomis of Wyoming said just today, maybe he should consider a woman as his running mate. And she mentioned two possibilities, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and New Hampshire Senator Kelly Ayotte.
John Gizzi from Newsmax, White House correspondent, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Up next, pressure on journalists, why freedom of the press is often limited in parts of the world. And 100 days to the Summer Games, a Catholic athlete explains the role of faith in preparing for the Olympics. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Is the media being silenced by terrorist and political forces around the world? The annual Freedom of the Press Index released today shows that it is. Gene Policinski is CEO of the Newseum in Washington. He's here to break down the numbers for us. Where in the world is journalism most suppressed and why, Gene?
Almost difficult to answer that. If you're in Russia, it's because the propaganda machine is running roughshod over what's left of a free press. If you're in Syria, you die. If you're in Turkey, the violence from the Middle East spills out and you might be assassinated. If you're in Brazil, it's a combination of the economy, and on the western side of Brazil, it's terrorists, narco gangs. So unfortunately, the circumstances are so bad around the world, it's hard to say any one area, except for Syria, where the actual death of journalists is a huge issue.
Yeah, we've seen journalists kidnapped, beheaded. Is that still a problem for them out there?
You know, it really is. Journalists are no more in the crosshairs than ever before because, well, you were needed to get the message out before. With the internet now, you're an impediment to the crafted message that ISIS or ISIL puts out and governments put out. So you've gone from being not just neutral, but almost being sought after to being a target.
Because we are so connected, how on earth is it possible to suppress media?
You know, that's the only bright side of this tragic circumstance. It's harder than ever because there's so many ways to get on the internet that news can get out. You know, the tragic truth today is you can kill the journalists, but not the journalism.
Tell us about the Newseum's Freedom of the Press map that really puts this out there.
You know, with Freedom House, we use their rankings and ratings, and it, again, depressing, it shows that only 1 out of 7, and we did this today, 1 out of 7 people in the world lives in an area where the press is truly free. If you look at the map, green, yellow for partially free, red for not, it's dominated by red and yellow.
As Americans, we need to be grateful.
Oh, an amazing difference in this country of how things operate.
From the Newseum, Gene Policinski. Thanks for joining us, Gene.
My pleasure.
U.S. Olympic athletes light New York's Empire State Building as they begin the 100-day countdown to the 2016 Summer Games in Rio. Dagmara Wozniak is a U.S. Olympian competing in fencing, Skyping with us today from New York City. As a Polish-born Catholic, has your faith played a role in the journey to the Olympics for you?
I definitely believe that my faith has played a big role in my journey to the Olympics and how I've been well-rounded as an athlete. My parents have always kept, the holidays and their Polish culture along with that. It's a little bit different than in the United States, but the big holidays, Christmas and things like that is really instilled with me since birth. So I kind of, portrayed that as my training, really disciplined and believing in everything that I do. And I feel, it's an honor to represent the United States as well as representing, my family and myself and, having faith in just something greater than just the work that you put in.
Well, it does take work. Your natural talent obviously is a gift from God, but isn't it your hard work that develops that?
I definitely believe that hard work can get you, successful in what you're doing. It has a lot of discipline and again, believing in what you do and believing that you can do it and that there is, your work, but also that there's just so many things out there that you can't control and you're just hoping it's on your side.
Well, you have a very demanding training schedule. How do you keep your faith strong in all that?
For me, I definitely, look for physical, mental, spiritual balance, doing whatever I can, eating healthy, making sure my mind is right, again, waking up, being thankful for waking up, having my family as well, going through this journey with me. My mother got through cancer, so that was a lot of good faith with the family coming together and believing, that she can get through it. And she's definitely taught me a lot about, believing in myself and being strong and keeping the faith. So for sure, I have a lot to credit my mother for being such a strong person and having so much faith in what she does. So I kind of try my best to carry it over in what I do.
Olympian Dagmara Wozniak, we look forward to watching you compete 100 days from now. Thanks.
Thank you.
And for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight looking back at the canonizations of Popes John the 23rd and John Paul II 2 years ago today. Good night. God bless.